By the mid-1950s, Elvis Presley had become something America had never seen before. Teenagers were fainting in the aisles. Parents were writing angry letters to newspapers. Ministers were calling him a threat to the moral fabric of the nation. And yet, just a handful of years earlier, he was a quiet, polite boy in Memphis, Tennessee, who couldn't afford a guitar strap and borrowed one from a friend. How does that happen? How does a child who grew up in a two-room house in Tupelo, Mississippi, a house his father built with his own hands and later lost to the bank, how does that boy become the king of rock and roll? And here is the question that haunts the whole story. What did he have to give up to get there, and did he ever get it back? The answer begins not on a stage, not in a recording studio, but in a church, and in a neighborhood, and in a kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food, though there was plenty of that kind of hunger too. Stay with us, because the story of Elvis Presley is not just a music story. It is an American story. And for many of you watching right now, it is your story too. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to Tupelo, Mississippi. January of 1935. Elvis Aaron Presley was born into a world of genuine hardship. His father, Vernon, was a young man who worked whatever jobs he could find. His mother, Gladys, was the emotional center of the family, fierce, devoted, and deeply protective of her only surviving child. Elvis had a twin brother, Jesse Garin, who was stillborn that same day. That loss shaped Gladys for the rest of her life, and it shaped Elvis too. He grew up knowing he carried something extra, a weight, and perhaps a purpose. If you were a child during the early 1940s, you know what that America looked like. The Depression had loosened its grip, but just barely. Families made do. You fixed things instead of replacing them. You knew your neighbors because you needed them. For the Presleys, church was not optional. It was oxygen. The First Assembly of God congregation in Tupelo gave young Elvis his first real exposure to music. The raw, full-throated gospel sound that would never leave his voice, no matter what style he sang in later years. And here is the second question worth holding onto as we move forward. Why did the music establishment, the very people who should have welcomed a talent like Elvis, fight so hard to push him back down? The answer has everything to do with where his music came from. And that story is more complicated and more important than most people realize. When Elvis was around 13 years old, the Presley family moved to Memphis. Vernon had found work there, and the city, loud, layered, alive, was a revelation for a boy from rural Mississippi. Memphis in the late 1940s was a city where musical worlds collided. On Beale Street, the blues rang out from clubs and doorways. Gospel poured from churches on Sunday mornings. Country music drifted from radio sets in kitchens across the white neighborhoods. Elvis absorbed all of it. He didn't see genre lines. He heard feeling. He taught himself guitar. He sang at school. He was quiet in class but electric when he performed, though at this point, performing meant singing for a few classmates or family members. Nobody outside his circle had any idea what was coming. Then came the moment that changed everything. In the summer of 1953, Elvis walked into a small recording studio on Union Avenue in Memphis, Sun Studio, run by a man named Sam Phillips. The story goes that Elvis paid a few dollars to record a couple of songs as a gift for his mother. But the studio's front desk assistant, a sharp-eared woman who handled walk-ins that day, took note of the young man's voice. She wrote his name down on a slip of paper and made sure her boss saw it. Sam Phillips had been saying for years, according to those who worked with him, that if he could find a white singer who had the feel of the black artists he admired and recorded, he could change the music business. When he finally sat Elvis down in front of a microphone in earnest, what happened in that small room was something none of them had planned. It was loose. It was joyful. It was neither country nor blues nor gospel. It was all three at once, filtered through a 20-year-old kid who had grown up listening to everything and imitating no one. Sun Records released Elvis's first single in the summer of 1954. Local radio picked it up, then regional stations. Then something started happening that nobody had a name for yet. Teenagers responded to Elvis the way they had never responded to any performer before. Not just with enthusiasm, with something closer to recognition, as if he was expressing something they felt but couldn't say. If you were a teenager in 1954 or 1955, you may remember that feeling. The sense that the music on the radio, pleasant as it was, didn't quite speak to you, and then something came on that did. But not everyone was celebrating. Radio programmers in certain markets refused to play his records. Some called the music dangerous. Others used language that, looking back, reveals exactly what they were really objecting to, not the music itself, but where it came from. Elvis was performing a synthesis of Black American musical traditions, and he was doing it to enormous white audiences. For some in the establishment, that was the threat. Sam Phillips, for his part, believed in what he had. He eventually sold Elvis's recording contract to RCA, a major label with national reach. The price was, by the standards of the day, remarkable. It was considered one of the most significant deals in the young history of the recording industry. And now Elvis Presley had a national stage. By 1956, Elvis appeared on national television. The reaction was immediate and seismic. Switchboards lit up. Ratings shattered records. And the controversy, the hip movements, the curled lip, the barely contained energy only made more people tune in. He was 21 years old, and then at the absolute peak of his fame, Elvis Presley was drafted into the United States Army. It was 1958. He was 23 years old and the most famous entertainer in America. His manager, a man known publicly as Colonel Tom Parker, made the decision that Elvis would serve as a regular soldier. No special treatment, no entertainment unit. According to those who analyzed the strategy later, Parker believed this would broaden Elvis's appeal and silence his critics. Whether it was the right call is something historians and fans still debate. What is not debatable is what happened while Elvis was away. His mother, Gladys, the woman who had been his anchor since that two-room house in Tupelo, became gravely ill. She died in August of 1958, before Elvis had completed his service. Those close to him described the loss as something he never fully recovered from. The bond between them had been unlike anything else in his life. She had believed in him before anyone else did, and now she was gone. Elvis served his full term. He returned to America in 1960 to a hero's welcome. The screaming crowds were still there. The record deals were waiting. Hollywood wanted him, but something had shifted. The question we planted at the very beginning, what did Elvis have to give up to reach the top, and did he ever truly get it back, begins to find its answer here. The 1960s brought Elvis movies, dozens of them, and soundtrack albums, and continued commercial success. But the creative fire of those early Sun studio sessions was harder to find. The films were light entertainments, profitable but formulaic. Many who admired him felt he was capable of more. It wasn't until the late 1960s that Elvis found his way back. A television special, broadcast in December of 1968, showed audiences a different side of him. Dressed in black, seated close to a small audience, he performed with an intimacy and intensity that reminded people why they had fallen for him in the first place. Critics and fans responded with something close to relief. He followed it with recordings that many consider among the finest of his career. He returned to live performance in Las Vegas, and the shows were extraordinary. A man in his 30s, fully in command of his instrument, performing for audiences who had grown up with him. And that brings us back to where we began. The boy from Tupelo who grew up without running water, who absorbed gospel and blues and country music in a city that kept those worlds carefully separated. That boy did something that changed American culture permanently. He didn't just sell records. He moved a line. He made it possible for sounds and styles that had been kept apart to find each other in the open. Every artist who came after him, in rock, in soul, in country, in pop, was working in a landscape he helped create. Memory, if you grew up in the 1950s or 1960s, Elvis was not just a singer on the radio. He was a marker in time. You remember where you were when you first heard him. You remember the arguments at the dinner table, parents who didn't understand, and you knowing somehow that this was important. For some of you, his music was the soundtrack to your first dance, your first heartbreak, your first real feeling of being young and alive in a world that was changing faster than anyone could keep up with. He was one of you, a kid who came from nothing and made something extraordinary. And that never really gets old. What do you remember most about Elvis? Was it a song? A performance? The first time you saw him on television? We want to hear from you. Drop your favorite Elvis memory in the comments below, the song, the moment, the feeling. Every story matters here. If this brought back something good, please subscribe to Golden Age Stories. We tell these stories every week, the people, the moments, and the music that made your generation unforgettable. Next time, we're going back to Hollywood and a story you think you know but probably don't. We'll see you then.